On Tuesday, it'll be 2 months. 2 months since the NHL shut down. It has been a very long time, and I've been doing my best to juggle around topics and talk about hockey. I've never had to do what I've done over the last 2 months. I have never had to do videos where there's nothing going on. Remember, we've been in the midst of a roster freeze, so while yes, there have been some signings of entry level contracts and an extension here and there, I've never been in this situation where there's been nothing happening. So in all likelihood, and I mean, I was waiting yesterday to see if anything came out. There wasn't anything today. It's still quiet. This has to be the week. This has to be the week because practice facilities, the deadline has to be late May. Now, what's interesting is that they've said they're not at critical mass. So there are some areas where players could get on the ice right now, where they could open up rinks and they could play because of local restrictions being lifted. They could potentially get out and practice in small groups. But the NHL wants to make sure there's no imbalance. So they want to make sure that, like, for instance, if you're in Columbus, and let's say Columbus has said, all right, well, you guys can go out and practice. And the Blue Jackets are like, all right, and they go out and practice. They want to make sure it's a situation where they're not going to have them go out and practice while, let's say, the Maple Leafs can't for another 2 or 3 weeks. So they want to make sure that there's as many teams that are able to practice as possible. Now, what may end up happening is that teams may end up practicing in a neutral site. So neutral site won't be used for the games themselves, but it could very well be used for practice. And, of course, then you have to figure out how the European players are going to make their way over to play. You're going to have to figure out how to get all that straightened out. And I'm sure that there are lawyers and people at NHL headquarters working on getting all that all straightened out, like figuring out, okay, what are we going to do about signing bonuses on July 1st? What are we going to do about all this other stuff? There are people working on that behind the scenes right now, and the NHL and the NHLPA are working together. And keep in mind, the NHL can't drag the players back. If the players go, we're not doing it, and the union says no, there's nothing the NHL can do. They have to work in coordination with this and work together on this. The games will be played, it looks like, starting in July. Now, I understand a lot of players on teams that aren't in a playoff spot saying, well, I don't want to go back and play if we're not in a playoff spot. Why would I want to go back and play? Now, for the NHL, they want to recoup as many of their losses as possible through this, including their TV contracts, which they're beholden to. And with TV networks being, in a position where they're losing a lot of money on ad revenue as well. So sports networks in general have seen their ratings just plummet while there hasn't been sports on. So they would absolutely take advantage of, oh, you guys didn't give us all of the product that we paid for, so we're not going to pay. We're going to take some money back, which makes sense, doesn't it? So if you're a ticket holder right now saying, I want to get money back because the tickets I have paid for, that game didn't get played, you're right, and you will get paid back. It's a matter of when. Different teams are approaching it differently, and maybe it'll be a credit for next year. Well, then why should networks who didn't get to broadcast the games that they paid for have to pay the full contract? And that's where the NHL has an issue, in that if they don't broadcast those games, if they don't come up with an alternative, those networks have every right to say, you guys didn't fulfill your contract, therefore we're going to take back some of that money we gave you. It's going to take more money out of the NHL coffers, which is not good for the players or the owners. Keep in mind that TV money is split between the players and the owners. It's part of the reason why the players are all excited about what free agency could have looked like in a couple of years before the world came to an end, and then we just don't know now what it's going to look like in a couple of years. But that TV contract affects both sides. That's why when players say, well, I'm not going back, I have a funny feeling that there will be players that do say that, and the NHL will respect it, and they'll say, that's fine, you don't want to come back, and teams will say that as well. You're not going to be the team or the league that forces them to come back. You can't. But, what I think they do, and I think this makes sense, they're talking about a 2014 playoffs. Makes sense in a number of ways. First off, you can have hub cities where you have six teams in 4 cities. So you have the smallest amount. I mean, you could have 12 teams in 2 cities, but then you're getting kind of, iffy. But the idea of finishing out the regular season is great. But now you can go to the networks and go, hey, we're going to have this play-in. So this play-in to get to the playoffs, and we'll put that on the networks. We're not going to put that on just, playoff, because it's not technically the final 16. And those games should get good ratings, and that should make up some of your losses. And then, maybe we could talk about the contract and making this work. So What this also means is that's 7 teams of players they don't have to worry about. That's 7 teams worth of players. That's a lot of players. They don't have to worry about lodging. They don't have to worry about isolating. They don't have to worry about all that. These players are going to be encouraged, even those that don't play, to be told, you keep social distance. We want to make sure that our players are as healthy as possible come next season. So 24 teams playoffs makes a lot of sense. So then you have no situation where guys going, oh, I don't want to go back because, we're playing, but it doesn't mean anything. Every single game matters if you do a 24-team playoffs. And then, so the way you'd work it is 8 teams would have a bye for, whatever it is. And then it would be a best of 3, maybe a best of 5 play-in, where you'd have teams 9 through 24, and you'd have them deciding who's going to be the other 8 teams once the official playoffs get started. But reality, it's a 24-team playoffs. So the weird part of this, too, is that the draft in June still looks very, very likely. So the reasoning behind this is simple. You have the playoffs end in, say, September, and you're going to have the next season starting probably in, they can aim for November. They can aim for December as well. November would be ideally probably the time where you'd want to get it started, just you're not squashing things down too much. But it could end up being a December start. The Stanley Cup could be awarded in August or September. You want to have some separation between the 2 seasons. You have to. So if you have the draft in June, that means that all you have between September and November is free agency, arbitration, and the salary cap stuff. And potentially then you're looking at maybe buyouts, that kind of thing. So that would lower the amount of work needed. This would give the players about a 6-week time off. Keep in mind, they haven't been on the ice in a long time. So they've had a nice long break here. And the season they'd be going into would be between July and September. So that's a 3-month season. And then you get a 6 weeks off. And then you'd be back to work in November. So the interesting part to me is that the draft still probably happens in June. I'm just wondering, like, next year's training camps and how all that's going to work is going to be very interesting as well. The 2021 season will start late. I can't see a way that next season doesn't start late. And then the question becomes a matter of, will we still be talking about hub cities in the fall? Will we still be talking about the potential to have teams being kept isolated in the fall? I think we do. I know there's people saying, well, you've got to have fans, and they can't keep the fans away. Well, if they don't sell tickets to the fans, they can. Now I know, and the league wants to have fans back in attendance. Players want to play in front of fans. We as fans want to go and see games, but it has to be safe. So until it's safe, which could be a while yet, in all likelihood, this season starts late, and we may very well be looking at hub cities again. And very, very limited travel. And look at it this way, too. So if the NHL is going to be paying money to have all these guys isolated, and if you're going to isolate them with their families. So one of the clickbait things that I didn't like that I saw yesterday was an article on Devan Dubnyk saying he's not interested in staying away from his family. And the headline was basically on the lines of Dubnyk going, yeah, forget it, I'm not playing. And that's not what the article said. When you actually read the quotes, it was, I don't have an interest in playing in a situation where I'm going to be isolated from my family for months. But they're still talking about it, and they're still trying to work through a way to make this work where we won't have to do that. So I thought the article's title was a little bit misleading and kind of clickbaity. And I felt mad when I clicked on it because that's not what he said. He said in that situation, but they're still working on it, meaning there's still reason to believe that they're not going to. And not only that, but Bill Daly last week said, totally understands players don't want to be away from their families. We get that. So it's not a matter of, well, screw you guys, we're going to make you do it. So again, the NHLPA has to agree with the NHL on this. I'm really hoping we see an extension of the CBA. And the NBA announced as well that their salary cap drops next year. It's going to drop. And they're looking at it realistically, and I applaud the NBA for this. For looking at the numbers and going, we're not going to be able to make this work next year, so we're going to have to drop the salary cap, which is going to drive some NBA teams nuts. This is why when I hear people talking about, well, the NHL is going to leave their cap exactly where it is. That's already been talked about. It hasn't, though. Nothing's been decided. So the NHL, what they're going to do with their cap, I honestly think you have to find a way to scale it back, because there's one or two things that happen here. If the cap stays the same, but your revenues are going to tank, that means the amount of escrow, the amount of money that's taken out of these players' pockets before they get their checks could be as high as 34%, is the number I've been hearing. So 34% of their paychecks. And I understand that people are saying, well, if he makes $10 million, you only get $6 million, who cares? Well, the players are going to care, and so they have to find a way to make this work, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. I would expect an announcement. Today's the 10th. I would think the latest they can go before making an official announcement would be the 15th. Keep in mind, it's already been said that if they come into Canada, they have to isolate 14 days before they can do anything. So they have to be quarantined 14 days before they can be out and doing their practice and everything. So if they're going to do this in Canada, they have to make an announcement pretty quick. And then they have to work on getting the players back. And it's a matter of, again, it's a matter of lawyers and people in business suits making deals to make sure these players can get out of Europe and come over and play on a work visa. Work visas are possible. I know in the States they're bringing people over on work visas to help with crops and things like that. So it's already been said the government wants sports back, and our own local, I mean BC, Bonnie Henry, who's been the face of all of this through in BC. She even said yesterday, she said she wouldn't mind watching some hockey. We all need the distraction. It would be nice if they can find a safe way to do it if hockey was back. She's absolutely behind it. And that's been what I've heard from medical professionals and from politicians. So there isn't really any, I know there are people who are put off by the idea of sports right now, but for sports, it's a business, and they are trying to protect their business and try to make sure they don't go out of business. So and part of that, especially for the NHL in the United States, is you have to remain visible, because there are a lot of sports out there that could possibly push hockey to the back. It's not that long ago hockey was kind of, off to the fringes, and it was seen as just, brawls and all that stuff. And we don't want to see hockey end up getting pushed to the back again and have a sport pass it the way the NBA did in the 80s. The NBA in the 80s, it started out in the 80s actually being behind soccer, Major League Soccer, as well as your NHL, and then Michael Jordan made the NBA absolutely fantastic. And so the NHL doesn't want to risk, while they're off, let's say they say, all right, well, we're going to shut down for this year, and we're not going to bother with next year either. They don't want to risk in that void, in that vacuum, another sport coming out and garnering that audience that then you can't get back after being off for over a year. So it's going to be interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. And again, once an announcement is made next week, and I would think this is the week that it's going to happen, I will be here to provide that for you. Thank you guys so much for everything. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and I will talk to you again soon.